right, for our next karaoke selection, they tell you about this? No? Okay. Freebird. Good. There we go. We got some good stuff here. All right. All right, so let's get started on our next one. So I'm going to do a quick intro. I'm excited about this. I know these two guys up here, known them for some years now, and have had the pleasure of seeing what they've done and built over the years, and so excited to talk a little bit more about this. And I think another really good part of the holistic discussion that we're having today. So let me go ahead and introduce you to our panel. I say panel, it's really two guys and a moderator. So on your right, my left, Brendan Clemmer. So he is an ICS security engineer with a fervent commitment to safeguarding critical infrastructure through secure automation. With a comprehensive understanding of industrial systems, ICS cybersecurity, he specializes in crafting and implementing strong security frameworks tailored to the unique needs of oil and gas facilities. Brendan focuses proactively addressing cyber threats and preserving the operational integrity of vital assets. His expertise encompasses a large area of including in-depth knowledge of ICS vulns and attack vectors, IEC 62443, threat modeling, risk assessments, pen testing, and a genuine, am I fading in out? There we go. Rolling on too long? So, you got another one? Yeah. Dead battery. Dead battery. That was a subtle way of saying, Sam, get to the point. All right. He's got a long resume. Both of these guys do. I could be up here and spend half an hour doing this. Again. Here we go. All right. I'm going to try it again. All right, so Kaleem Khawaja, he's a senior information security professional with extensive expertise in designing, implementing, and integrating security into complex networks. He has over 25 years of IT experience with 20 in information security gained in energy, oil and gas, financial, and consulting industries. Kaleem has held various roles, including lead engineer and manager, and his specialties include secure infrastructure design, implementation and integration, security of process control networks and industrial control systems, intrusion detection and prevention, threat and vulnerability analysis, risk assessment management, digital forensics, and incident response. So a lot of collective knowledge sitting in these two chairs up here. So we're going to start. Gentlemen, you want to? Can we hear you both? You want to say?
Can you hear me?
No?
I think this one's working.
That one's working. No power on this one. No power? All right, so I'm going to pass him mine. Running out of batteries. Here, I'll take yours and just ask the first question that you go. All right, so we'll start with this question. What are some of the best practices you can recommend for an ICS security program? Kaleem, do you want to start?
Yeah. I think the first thing we have to do is look at the strategy of the company. So you have to align the best practices according to what is the strategy of the company. So I work for a large oil and gas company, so the strategy is well defined. So it's already kind of there. But I think you start with the fundamentals, which to me are a person who's responsible for the cybersecurity of a site. It could be a platform, it could be a rig, it could be a wind farm, whatever that is. One person that's responsible for it. The other fundamental to me is the asset identification and inventory. Those two things you have to start an effective cybersecurity program. Then you can move into the actual security controls, which range from start with network architecture. That includes your segregation, proper 3-tier architecture where you're segregating your OT environment from the...
New microphones do not like us somehow. Even this one isn't working.
Nope. Well, this one's kind of back. Yeah, so when then you go into network segregation. Three-tier architecture. From there, you can actually then go into the host, protecting the host endpoint. So that includes your anti-malware, antivirus. Then I think one of the more important one, and we heard in the other talks as well, is the remote user access management, right? So it has to have two-factor authentication. You got to be able to control when people get in, how they get in, and you should have the capability to cut them off if you need to. What else? Training for the people who are at the site. Then additional services, because we're a large organization, we provide some of the security services for our sites. That includes firewall management. That includes providing the antivirus service for the endpoint, security management, security monitoring, collection of the event logs. So all of that comes back into our consolidated SOC. So those are some of the points that I would say that are necessary for you to have an effective OT cybersecurity program.
I think that I would add like risk management, but you covered all the basics, and that was pretty comprehensive. But understanding supply chain management, just assessment of services, a constant reassessment, and just managing your risk intelligently and calmly.
One of the things, Kaleem, you also mentioned, but I wanted to just kind of expound upon, but is important is having the contact at the sites, right? And that a lot of times that comes back to some of the original thread we were talking about of building those bridges, building the relationships with the people you need to, but also super important to know when the shit hits the fan, who am I going to call, right?
Yeah, I will also add what Brandon mentioned about the risk management and supply chain. So obviously that's one of the hot topics. We hear about the supply chain risk management at this point. So one of the ways that we do it, again, large oil and gas company, so we have resources, is the contractual agreements with those vendors. So we have a little bit of weight that we can, push them for some of those things and make them adhere to some of our internal security controls, cybersecurity controls that we want. So that's one of the ways to do it. Obviously, there are other areas of risk management of where you go out and look for those suppliers that you have, not only from OT perspective, but from IT perspective, how they get into your environment. So remote access for them, support contracts. One of the things that we have to worry about is some of our package vendors need direct access in order to provide support. How is that managed? There's always a give and a take. They have their own solutions that they want to implement. I'm not going to name names, but I think some people know. So that's a challenge.
Let's see if this one works. Hey, it works again. All right. Very good. So let's go on to the next question. What are some other controls and or services you think are essential for securing ICS?
Brandon?
So definitely disaster recovery, incident response is, like we just heard from the gentleman at Dragos, is incredibly important. But not only just having it in place, but reaffirming it periodically, running tabletops with your teams, not just the managers of the teams, but get your SOC guys in, get representatives from the sites, get your security tooling teams, whatever your organization kind of looks like, and run those periodically. I know that like some places, like we can't obviously where we're at do every single site every quarter, but a little bit counts, because you're not only confirming your controls, but you're also building these teams, and people become more familiar between IT and OT, which has a huge amount of value.
Yeah, I agree with that. So Brendan talked about the incident response, backup and restore. I think that's another one. You got to be able to make sure that the backups that you're taking, you're able to use them to restore your services.
Very good. So, and well, potentially, if you can, and architecture, right? Zoning, segmentation, some basic stuff like that too, right? I mean, it's not a service necessarily, but it takes a lot of work, and a lot of these things I know that you guys have gone through too. Going from something that's been built over many years, and then going to have to re-architect everything to still complete a process, and yet be better architected is that's not a small lift, right?
No, that's the challenge for some of our brownfield sites, right? So I mentioned at the top the three-tier architecture. So that's what it really looks like, that you have a firewall in between your corporate network, a DMZ, and then your process control network environment, right? So we have to have that. That's a thou shall must do this. Mm-hmm. So some of the sites or some of the acquisitions that we do don't have that. And then we have to go back and actually implement that, and it's a challenge for brownfield sites. Yeah, absolutely.
What challenge, and going off script here a little bit, but when you acquire a new site, what are some of the things you're doing to get them to a point where you are trusting them into your existing program?
Unofficial responses, we don't trust them, right? So yeah, we so have to establish the communication with their security department if they have one. And trust me, there's times that they don't, right? So if they do, then we establish the communication with them and take it from there to try to understand where they are from a security posture perspective. And then our internal security controls share that with them, discuss that, make sure they understand it, and then we'll see what their deltas are and try to go from there.
Very good, thank you. So next one's interesting and a hot topic. A lot of discussion around zero trust. So what are your thoughts on zero trust architecture? And Brandon, I don't know if you want to start here, because I know on the call earlier.
Oh, he does, yes.
He has a few opinions.
Yeah, I have a little bit of opinion on zero trust for sure. I think of it in terms of a strategy, right? And it has pillars that form the foundation. The 7 pillars of zero trust are just ways to measure your maturity in your ongoing process of strengthening and refining your posture, right? It's not meant to be just a product or this thing that you look at. It's something to help you mold into something greater, right? The DoD believes in it, and they created this zero trust strategy that applies to their pretty diverse OT infrastructure. And in that strategy, they outline that zero trust is a concept, just a concept. It's not a product, it's not a capability, and they integrate zero trust into the 5 functions of cybersecurity. So we got identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. Traditionally, OT networks have been designed with perimeter-based security models, right? And so, just like we heard from Dragos just a little bit ago, that's not sufficient. We're seeing increased sophistication of cyber threats, and then just with the pandemic, we're seeing this extra level of connectivity that we have, right? So our perimeter is effectively broken down. So we need to rethink about how we approach security in these kind of environments. We have to modernize. Even though the spirit of the 90s is alive and well in ICS, we need to, as security practitioners, we need to kind of push it a little bit forward. We all know, though, that zero trust operates on the principle of never trust, always verify. And that in and of itself doesn't violate any of the things that we know about OT security, right? It assumes that threats may exist both inside and outside your network perimeter. And I think that any mature organization already operates under that assumption, right? We understand that threat actors are everywhere, and access to resources and systems need to be continuously verified based on multiple factors, like user identity, device health, behavior analysis, and other contextual information that you get from like security monitoring. It is easy to get caught up on the IT implementation of zero trust, right? We want to think about pulling out our phone and clicking our 2-factor every 15 minutes or whatever, every time we open our browser. And that doesn't necessarily have to be a requirement of Zero Trust. Again, it's a concept, not a product. So that's just one way to implement the principle of verify and authenticate. Since Zero Trust is a way to measure your maturity and not a set of standards like IEC 62443 or the NIST 882, it allows you flexibility in the implementation, right? And I truly believe that using those foundational pillars of Zero Trust can help you reach your goals with IEC 62443. I don't think that there's anywhere where they contradict one another. But the DoD does consider a core of verify and authenticate to mean that each user allowed on premises is going to have passed rigorous personnel screening, right? You got your clearance. And so I don't think that we think about that when we're talking about Zero Trust, right? But there is a people aspect, and all it is just measuring that maturity along those pillars.
So a lot to say there, right? I'm sure that some of you in the audience have counterpoints to this as well. To me, the biggest thing is it practical for the OT environment? I can see certain aspects that can be implemented. Others I can see that can cause issues for the field personnel and stop them from doing their job. Also, when you start to think about having to authenticate devices at level 0 or 1, how's that practically going to work? So that's where I say that a complete risk-based assessment needs to be done for a particular ICS environment to understand if the Zero Trust concept will be beneficial overall in enhancing the security as opposed to causing some issues for the field personnel to do their job. So that's my counterpoint to that. The other one that I have, we all know that we need better authentication in the OT environment. But again, we've all heard and learned that you don't just go in and install Active Directory inside that environment to solve that. In order to provide that kind of authentication, you're going to need to rely on some form of directory services. Could be Active Directory, could be anything else. Right. See, yep. So could be Active Directory, could be anything else. So, yeah. So I guess what I'm saying is a complete risk-based analysis of a particular site or a scenario before you go and say, yeah, we're going to do Zero Trust in our OT environment. I know, Sam, that you have some points as well.
So will you expand on that and why you're wrong? No. I think I'll keep my mouth shut at this point. But yeah, I mean, they're valid. You both have some valid points to it. I keep thinking about, every time I hear about any of that stuff, I think about how do you apply it to tech that is 30 years old, right? How do you go back and, it is. And you mentioned level 0. Yeah. Eventually we'll get the batteries right. You mentioned level 0, 1 and that kind of thing. Yes, I mean, authentication with that, I mean, absolutely, valid concern. That's just unreasonable. Unless you want somebody there on a button all day long, 24-hour shifts, right? That's not going to happen, but yeah. Is it just a wireless thing? Okay, gotcha. You got to lift it up like that. Yeah, that guy gets a bonus. All right, let's go on to the next one. So, what have been the 2 greatest challenges you have faced while building your program? Talking about building.
So I think the biggest challenge for myself would be the skill set and then the concept of OT security, what that is. We all know about the skill set. We hear it, that there are not enough people who understand, but I think it fundamentally comes down to people trying to understand what OT security means. There are a lot of people who are interested in this field. It's the concept of understanding what that means. So I'll quote Rob Lee here, and hopefully I can verbatim quote him. The mission is different, the challenges are different, the risks are different. Therefore, the challenge itself is different. Making people understand that, and I think one other aspect that he talks about is the culture is different. So understanding that culture, understanding that mission, why it's different, why the challenges are different, and how to approach them. I think that's the key for people to understand. Within our own organization, there are a number of people who are interested in this field because they hear it, they see it, it's a hot field. But getting them to understand the concept of OT security, why it's different, is the challenge.
Yeah, I would say easily the greatest challenge is staffing, and just getting teams on board with change as well, right? I don't think that there's a skill gap in cybersecurity at all. I think that there's a gap in between where the hiring teams, the recruitment teams exist, and the people that are looking for jobs. But with OT, it's a little bit muddied, right? Just like Kaleem was saying, that finding people with an OT skill set that want to learn the IT stuff is kind of difficult. But then also taking somebody that has an IT skill set that's, they bring something unique to the table that wants or can understand OT is also a challenge, right? It's such a unique niche that it creates a shortage.
So on that point, to kind of go one step deeper on this, how do you maintain, because staffing is an issue, and I see, there's certainly concern about churn of those as that skill set builds and becomes better, and the market's there for those people. Like, how do you retain those folks and keep them interested in moving along in their careers?
So we tell them we're the best organization. No, so I think one of the things.
But we do the same, by the way, just saying.
One aspect how we do that is I mentioned earlier the training and the people who, a single point of responsible person, a single point of accountability, as we call it in our organization. So we're constantly in touch with those folks. Most of them are engineers. Brendan touched on an engineer who's interested in cybersecurity. I'm not an engineer by trade. I started in PCN or ICS cybersecurity around 2013. But it's easier to train an engineer in cybersecurity as opposed to turning an IT person into engineer. It took me 5-6 years to really understand the fundamental differences in the ICS and PCN security and then IT security. We don't have that kind of ramp now, right? So yes, granted there could be. I could still get people in. It will take them 3-4 years to get them to a level where they really can make a difference. But I can take an engineer and give them a year to learn about cybersecurity, and that's going to benefit us more than trying to take an IT person, turning them into OT cybersecurity person. By no means I'm not saying it's not doable. I'm a living example of that, right? I converted from that side. So, but if I had a chance and I have an opportunity to hire somebody within our organization, I will first look for an engineer who's interested in cybersecurity. So, answer your question, we remain in touch with a lot of engineers. We do a lot of reach out within our organization, and that's our conduit of keeping a constant flow of people who are interested in OT cybersecurity.
Great.
The organization size that we're at too helps as well, because there's places where people can pivot into other areas if they feel the burnout of being in something, which happens very much in cybersecurity, right? So we do have a really robust risk-based and GRC organization. We have our very cutting-edge SOC and CERT, intelligence. So there are places for them to fit in if needed. And it also grows their skill set, right? There's nothing bad about an OT person pivoting over into incident response, because that is a hugely valuable skill set.
Awesome. That actually pivots into the next question really well. What suggestions do you have in keeping the program on top of trends and changing internal environments, especially thinking as big as you guys are and as much movement as you potentially have internally? Maybe it's not so much. Maybe you don't have as much disruption in terms of the environment, et cetera. But what kinds of things do you think are good takeaways?
So just keeping the program on top of trends really is going to be just developing your people, right? So the greatest value that any one person brings is their experience. So however we can work to spread that experience out to the rest of the team is going to be hugely important, right? We got to work to disseminate that experience through information sharing, writing papers, mentoring people is really important. And just sitting on multidisciplinary teams, where we can get a group of people together that have different skill sets that work together to solve a problem. They're going to learn from the process, and you really can't put a dollar sign on that. But that's going to grow everybody's knowledge, everybody's effectiveness. Continuing education, like Kaleem had mentioned earlier too, coming to conferences, being able to talk to your peers about the problems that they're trying to overcome, it's of huge value, right?
Yeah, so I would agree with Brendan what just said. So this is just one example. Coming to this conference, speaking with other people, understanding their issues, sharing your issues, and maybe you can find common ground, you can learn from them. Taking that internally, I mentioned earlier, so we have a robust program. So we have community of interest program inside our own environment, where all of the people who are responsible for the cybersecurity of the site, they control the agenda, we provide the support. Then we do a face-to-face conference with those folks, try to do it once a year, where different topics that they are facing as challenge that we discuss. And then, just like Brendan said, attending other conferences, S4 is an example. Keeping in touch with what's happening in the government. There used to be a really good organization that doesn't exist anymore, Logic. So I represented BP there for about 10 years. It was really sad to see that Department of Homeland Security decided that they were going to continue the funding. So there are other organizations like that, consortiums, that we should pursue and look into. So that's, yeah.
So on that, and I have one last question, and we'll start thinking about y'all's questions too here to ask of these two gentlemen. What can we as a community, on that same thread, be doing more of? I mean, you mentioned that going to the conferences and things like that. Are we missing something somewhere? Like, is there a gap somewhere between what we're doing today and where we could create a much better spot for everybody? That's kind of a very broad, open question, right? And you weren't prepared for it, so I'm kind of throwing you under the bus a little bit here. But in that sense, we have the conferences, and you mentioned S4. That's a good conference, right, for Future Look. We're trying to get something started here. We have InfraGard here locally. We have, which isn't necessarily great for an international company. Like InfraGard is U.S. citizenship is a constraints, right? But it's a great community here in Houston, as an example. ISSA, ASACA, there's all these different organizations that are out there that we can participate in. Is there something else specifically around this up and coming that that folks should keep in mind and follow?
Not an easy answer, but I wish that there was a way that we're able to discuss some of the biggest challenges or incidents within our organizations.
Okay.
That's a challenge, right? So whenever we do that, I think the community is better, because you're able to share real life experiences, what exactly happened.
Yep.
So that's always really powerful. I remember when the crisis was happening, or had happened Right after that, it was S417, I believe.
Mhm. Yep.
And that gentleman now works for your Dragos, right?
Yes. Mhm.
He came on stage and was able to tell the story. That was really powerful.
Mhm.
There were a lot of lessons learned from there. I think so. That's the kind of information that we need more of, but it all gets into legal and communication departments getting their approvals and what you can and cannot say in an open forum like that. But at those conferences, if you talk to people, they may be able to share some of the stuff with you.
Just
That-
maybe not on a recorded session.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one-on-one. Yeah.
Gotcha. Very good. Incident response stories and real world breach stories. We do tend to only get a fraction of what actually happens out in front of us, through other sources, and whether that's press or sources like ONG ISAC and things like that, where we can actually share stuff, right? So let me go ahead and thank you. Thank you for that. Any questions? What questions do you have for Kaleem or Brendan? Yes. I'll bring this over.
What your definition of a material breach?
I don't know if I have a good answer for you on that.
I think in my experience, generally, it's usually around when you can tie a number to it, right? And usually that from the financial, we'll get there. All right, from the financial aspect, obviously when we go into these cyber physical systems and we're talking about potential injuries and other things, those are not, I mean, the CFO still has a number for this stuff, and I hate to say I've been in meetings before where the CFO was able to pull out a number for what the life of a employee would cost the company if it were lost, and it's not, and the companies do the right decisions, right? They're not going to say, oh, we're not going to do that because we can afford to lose 20 people. That's not but they have to understand that from a risk perspective, and it's just scary, right? So I think once you get into that point and it impacts what otherwise should be a profitable quarter or any of that kind of stuff, at the end of the day, that's what rules each of these companies, right? When you're publicly traded, does stock take a hit? Does my earning per share go down? What is it? That kind of thing, right? And you sure as heck don't want to be the one that does get all the press and Wall Street Journal, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What other questions? These are not the only people with the cybersecurity program in place. I know that. Yes, Grayson, coming to you.
First of all, thanks for doing this. For those that are just starting up cyber programs, obviously there's costs associated with products and training, all that stuff. But one thing that's easy is just putting stuff on the calendar and starting a cadence of something. What are the two things that you think should go on someone's calendar, and what cadence should they go on for repeating just to talk with the other parties or folks in the org?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, like for me, it would be multiple times a week, like 3 times a week, to have those conversations, to get involved with everybody. But you do need some downtime to be able to kind of ingest and take on that new information. What was the second half of the question? Beyond the cadence? What should go on the calendar? What should go on the calendar?
So when you talk about what should go on the calendar, you're talking about how they improve themselves, or it's
A brand new program and just standing it up. What should go on the calendar first?
okay. So I'm not sure about the calendar, but I would tell you that there's obviously a lot of good resources available. And it's going to seem like that I keep mentioning him. You should check out Rob Lee's blog. He has tons of resources. So you can start from there. The other thing I would say is open up the conversation with some of the engineers in your site. And if you're an engineer yourself, then you know why I'm saying that's important. And if you're an engineer, then open up a conversation with your IT security folks. Help them understand the challenges that you have, and vice versa. And then if you insist on putting something on the calendar that you should follow every week, I would say that you should just reading one article or a blog, or pick up a book that you should read, just as a reminder. A book might be too much once a week, but just as a reminder that you got to finish it, you got to read it. So there are a number of good authors out there. So some of them are in the audience, at least I see one. So you can just pick those up.
And definitely the Department of Homeland Security has their OT cert stuff. The training starts out very simple and continues on to the 301 course, which is in person in Idaho. Definitely every new person needs to get involved in that. It's free.
Yeah, and if you really want to go to sleep, pick up IE 62443. It's actually very comprehensive, and it's very well written. It's just very tedious.
Yeah, and those are good points. And to expand a little bit too, well, the other thing you could do to be a creative is when you have those meetings to get the team built and cohesive, have everybody bring a topic on a different week, right? So if I've got the engineer talking about something specific that they do every time and explaining the process, if I'm the cyber guy, maybe coming with a threat discussion or something like that. So each team basically having that gels the team together and so they're all part of what that movement is forward to drive that project forward, right? Any other questions? Yes, coming to you. Or choosing karaoke songs to wrap it up.
Yeah, not yet. My question, I want to come back to something you kind of alluded to with the comment about zero trust, and that's third-party risk management. Can you speak to the evolution of a third-party risk management program, kind of the key pillars of it, kind of how you've matured a program to assess and manage that risk, maybe even fourth-party risk management?
We haven't done that where I'm at. That's part of a battle that I'm fighting now, is to look loosely at zero trust and use it to help us secure gaps that may exist. So I wish I could say more about how I have matured risk management through those principles, but it's not been something I've hit on yet.
I can give you how we do it without zero trust, if that's what you want. Right. So so there's two ways to look at it. One is you can go with the industry standards. You can find a lot of standard questionnaires that are available that you can ask of your third party. So within our organization, it's a combination of those plus our internal standards. So those are given to a third party before we engage with them. It ranges from how do you protect the data, how do you authenticate your users, cloud environment, all of that. Based on the answers that you may give, it will put you in a certain category. And if there are certain things that are non-negotiable from our perspective from cybersecurity, we may go back to our procurement department to tell them that these things do not match, therefore ask them to change or find another vendor. So that's one way of doing that. Granted, this is from a privileged position of a large oil and gas company. A lot of organizations, if you're a smaller organization, you may not be able to do that because you have the need to go with that vendor.
Any other? Oh, yes, Harvey.
Harvey Nuz, I've got a question for you regarding governance, processes. What are you seeing in OT policies and procedures, and then especially as you move toward Industry 4.0. Is that a fair question? Does that make sense? Thank you.
So I think talking governance and OT is incredibly important. And multiple times we've mentioned IEC 62443. I think it's a great framework for devising your governance. I think it's incredibly important to have a separate OT and IT kind of governance and rules, and to make sure that those are two very different things. Because obviously, you look at like the CIA triad, we both look at different things. Just from a purely technical standpoint, not even talking about process, that's important to have that separated. But yeah, IEC 62443 is a very comprehensive document that really lays out what responsibilities you have as an asset owner, what the responsibilities are of the developers for the automation systems, and really, really great to model your entire organization around. There's no, NIST 882 as well, but yeah, it's pretty comprehensive. No need to reinvent the wheel.
So your question was around governance and Industry 4.0, correct? Yeah, so just to expand on Brandon's point, our internal standards are based off of some of the well-known standards in the industry that he mentioned. We do have a comprehensive governance and risk assessment program within the OT security. And there's conformance work, which our team, Brendan and I, do as well for our brownfield sites to make sure that they're conformant to our internal standards. Again, it's a combination of the IE 62443 and others Purdue reference model. It also reminds me the talk again at S4 where they talked about if the Purdue reference model is dead and should we look at a cloud-based model. So those are our internal talks that we look at as well from the Industry 4.0 that you're talking about. So the cloud is at the doorstep of the PCN. We have SCADA in the cloud already. It's a matter of time before the DCS goes that way as well. So yeah, so we try to keep on top of that. We rely on our internal standards for the governance and conformance work.
Very good. I think that's all we have time for. Thank you very much, Kaleem and Brendan. Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.